Hi, I'm Markham, and as you can see, I've prepared another video blog post for today, and what I want to talk about is the flexibility of structured sentencing. I occasionally hear people talk about how restrictive the sentencing grid can be, and sometimes that's true, especially if you're talking about more serious offenses, but for more common offenses, what I want to do is walk through a brief demonstration of the many sentencing options that are available that are possible under our law, especially if you're talking about somebody who has multiple convictions. So let's work through an example. Let's take a person convicted of two crimes, felony larceny and felony breaking or entering. Both of those are Class H felonies, and let's assume that the defendant is prior record level 1. So this is the grid cell that we're operating in, and that, by the way, is the most commonly used cell on the grid. So let's also assume there are no aggravating or mitigating factors presented, and so this sentence will be from the presumptive range. So what are the sentencing options available in this case? Let's lay them out on a spectrum, roughly from the least restrictive to the most restrictive. That's not an exact science, obviously. For example, many defendants find probation to be tougher than prison. But in general, though, I think most people would say that the most restrictive sentence you could do is consecutive active sentences. And if the judge does that in this case and gives consecutive 6 to 17-month sentences, then the defendant would serve over a year in prison, followed by 9 months of post-release supervision. At the other end of the spectrum, the judge could consolidate the two cases for judgment and enter a sentence for only one of them, and because this particular conviction is eligible for community punishment, it could be punished by a fine only with no suspended sentence or probation. If we work our way to the right from there, the court could impose a community punishment with unsupervised probation. The next thing would probably be supervised probation, and with that, there's really kind of a spectrum within a spectrum, because probation can be relatively hands-off, or it could involve things like house arrest or residential treatment, which are pretty restrictive. And it could also range from as short as a few months to as long as 5 years in any case. Probation could also include a split sentence, and that would give a mix of probation and incarceration. And for someone with a sentence of this length, the split could be as long as 4¼ months, and the court could order that to be served continuously or on weekends. If the judge did want to do an active sentence, but not the consecutive sentence that we talked about before, he or she could consolidate or run two sentences concurrently to active time, and that would result in about 6 months. So those are the basic options, but there are even some additional wrinkles that are possible. For example, the court could order one of the sentences active and then the other probationary sentence to follow. Probation officers call that a contingent sentence. And another option, if the prosecutor didn't object, the court could order the defendant into the Advanced Supervised Release Program, or ASR, and that would give the possibility of an early release, which for this defendant would come at about 4 months. And finally, there are even some options that would be even less restrictive than a community punishment, things like a PJC, or even possibly a deferred prosecution. So I think you get the idea. There are a lot of choices. And you'll note that we didn't even use the aggravated or mitigated range. And that's partially because I wanted to make the point that everything we talked about can be done without a single extra finding of fact by anyone. Based on those convictions alone, every single one of those sentences is legal and permissible for that defendant. That's good in the sense that it recognizes that every case and every defendant is different. But on the other hand, when you have broad discretion like that, it's a challenge. You have to work that much harder to know what the options are and then also to exercise discretion wisely and fairly and in a way that does justice in the case. If the grid were so restrictive that it required the same result every time, we could have a computer do it, but we don't. By design, it's a very human process and there are lots of choices. And I hope today's post helped illustrate that, and as a result helps you do your work. Thanks for watching.